Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dexcom. Take control of your diabetes and live life to the fullest with Dexcom. And by Club 1921, where diabetes connections are made.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
This week, Eversense is an implantable continuous glucose monitor. It just got FDA approval for 180-day wear. That's 6 months with no sensor changes. Something else that makes it different, it can vibrate to let you know if you're low or high.
And then people really, really enjoy that long-term concept, as well as the vibratory alerts. We've got people who work on the tarmac at the airport and they can't hear anything, so the only way they can actually do this is with the vibratory alerts.
That's the company's Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Fran Kaufman. We go in depth on the Eversense system, talking about how it all works and accuracy, and looking ahead to whether they'll partner with any insulin pumps for a closed loop. And they have big plans to make this system last even longer. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to another week of the show. Always so glad to have you here. We aim to educate and inspire about diabetes with a focus on people who use insulin. If you are new, my son was diagnosed with type 1 right before he turned 2. That was back in 2006. He is now 17 years old. My husband lives with type 2 diabetes. I don't have diabetes. I have a background in broadcasting, and that is how you get the podcast. And I have been doing this podcast since June of 2015. I looked back in the show archives. They're all on the website. You can use a search box to find what you're looking for. But I looked back, and we first talked to Eversense in October of 2018. We actually talked about Eversense at that time, not with the company. I talked to Daryl Green. He was one of the first people in the U.S. to get the sensor implanted. He is a news anchor, and he did it for his show. He showed the video of the implant, the whole thing. I will link that up in the show notes so you can hear what Daryl had to say at the time and see an early version of Eversense. It has changed a bit since then, but as you will hear this week, it is subcutaneous. It's just under the skin, and that is where the Dexcom or Libre or Medtronic Guardian sensor lies. But you can't insert it yourself. It is a quick outpatient procedure. It's minor, but it is still a procedure. The flip side, that's it for 6 months. No supply orders, no changing sensors. My guest here to talk about it and answer a bunch of your questions is Dr. Fran Kaufman. She is the Chief Medical Officer of Senseonics, the company that makes Eversense. She is a pediatric endocrinologist who still sees patients. And I could take the whole episode to read off her accomplishments. She's been in practice for 40 years, director of the Comprehensive Childhood Diabetes Center and head of the Center for Endocrinology, Diabetes, and Metabolism at Children's Hospital Los Angeles, former president of the American Diabetes Association, chair of the National Diabetes Education Program, on and on. And she has authored over 250 scientific manuscripts and numerous books. I love talking to people like Dr. Kaufman because, yes, she's very accomplished. She obviously knows her stuff, but you will hear her passion for this community. She is really in it to help all patients living with diabetes. Quick note, I realized as I was listening back, I do that a lot with these interviews for editing and editorial reasons. I didn't ask about the capacity to share the sensor data in real time, right? Share and follow for something like this. Eversense has had that for a while. They don't use the same terms. They call it Eversense Now. And that doesn't change with the E3. The latest iteration of Eversense does have the capacity for other people to follow the user's numbers. And I know that's important to a lot of you. I didn't want to imply that it isn't available by leaving it out of this interview. So you don't hear about it, that's on me, but it is there. Here's my interview with Dr. Kaufman. Dr. Kaufman, thank you so much for joining me. There's so much to learn about this system. My listeners are very interested. Thanks for spending some time with us.
Well, thanks for having me.
I would usually start by asking you to talk about the latest and greatest, this FDA approval that came through. But let's back up just for a minute. For people who are not familiar, can you take us through what the system consists of here? Kind of set the table of what we're talking about when we say Eversense.
Well, I'd love to, because I think understanding the system really enables you to understand this new innovation we have with our Eversense E3 system. The overall Eversense CGM is three components. It is a fully implanted sensor, very small. It's about 3 millimeters by 13 millimeters, and it's placed under the skin in the subcutaneous space, which is where all the sensors are working. They're all measuring the same glucose values in that interstitial space in what we call the interstitial fluid. But this is placed, minor office procedure done by healthcare providers that we train and certify. We also give them the tools to be able to do both the insertion and then when the time comes, the removal of the sensor and the insertion of the next sensor. That's the sensor. It is a fluorescent technology. All the other CGM systems are enzymatic, so that is another distinguishing feature for us. And then placed over the sensor with a very mild silicone-based adhesive is the transmitter. And the transmitter, through near field energy, powers the sensor, and that enables the sensor to read the interstitial glucose, give it back to the transmitter. The transmitter then sends it to the app on your smartphone, and that's where you can visualize your glucose value. But our transmitter, held in place again with a very mild silicone-based adhesive, so there are fewer skin reactions, also has a very unique capability of on-body vibratory alerts. So if you don't happen to have your smartphone sitting in your lap, you want to run upstairs for something, you want to run outside, you want to take a bike ride without your cell phone, then you will get the alerts right on body. The transmitter itself will vibrate, and you'll know whether you're going high or low with your glucose values, and that's a feature that many, many people truly enjoy and appreciate. And then the app is pretty much like all the apps. You can view your glucose every 5 minutes, the arrows for the directional change of your glucose, the glucose curve for the last 3 hours, 6 hours, whatever you'd like. And it also, of course, has alerts, both auditory as well as visual, on the cell phone itself. So those are the three major components, and lots that differentiate us.
Yeah. Let me go through a little bit of what you said and kind of break it down even further. You mentioned that the sensor uses something different to measure glucose level. This is based on light or fluorescence. Can you kind of explain that a little bit more, or as much as you can? Well, I know some of it's proprietary.
Well, and in lay terms, so that I can understand it. I mean, I am a physician, not an engineer. But essentially, the sensor is composed of a sensing surface where glucose attaches reversibly, dependent on how much glucose the sensor is exposed to at that point in time. And of course, this interstitial fluid is moving, so it's bringing glucose continuously to the sensing surface. And then the power is to turn on little LEDs that light up that sensing surface. They fluoresce by how much glucose is attached, and that fluorescence then is equal to the concentration of glucose.
Can you see that under your skin? Can you see that happening? Is there like a little light show going on?
No, you cannot see it. Although that could be cool.
Maybe that's an add-on feature for the future. I'd also heard, this was a while ago, so this may have changed. I had heard that earlier iteration of this technology made it that it was sensitive to light. In other words, if you were exposing that site to sunlight a lot, it didn't work as well?
Well, so it rarely occurs, but there is something called an ambient light alert. If there is a lot of sun exposure, and this is mainly because the tape is peeling, so the sides of the transmitter are a little bit more exposed, it will pick up that ambient light, tell you it can't reliably read the glucose, and ask you to, either cover it or, get out of the sunlight.
Also, if, as I said, kind of going through it step by step of what you mentioned, let's talk a little bit more about how the transmitter connects. I saw someone on Instagram recently showing how it is, for lack of a better word, it seems very easy to re-stick. She was kind of taking it on and off quickly, showing how easy and how different it is. Does that sound accurate? In other words, I think we're used to these devices staying on, and we want to stick them as tight as humanly possible, and then we rip them off like a really tight bandage. This is very different.
Well, this is very different. So it's not holding the sensor in place, right? The sensor is fully implanted. So if this falls off, you do not lose a sensor. You just place it back on. So the adhesive tape, obviously sticks on one side to you, on the other side to the transmitter. And if you hit a doorway or you're rough and tumbling with your kids and it falls off, you can just place it right back on to that same adhesive. Or if you need a new adhesive, you're just carrying one little piece of adhesive in your purse or in your pocket. And that's all you really need to carry around with you.
I don't know if this will ring a bell with you, but it seems to me like, do you remember color forms, which were like kind of stickers, but kind of not? You could take them on and off a few times. That's what this reminds me of.
I'm not sure exactly know what you mean.
Okay.
But what this is something that's very mild on the skin. We do ask you to replace it every day. Take it off, clean the skin, let it breathe for a little bit while you're taking your shower, drying off, and then place it right back on. So it's not that you have a piece of tape on for now what will be 6 months. You're changing that tape and letting the skin breathe. And of course, the tape is breathable as well.
That's a great point. I didn't want to imply that when I say take it on and off a bunch of times, that it's more than a day. What changed recently? What did the FDA approve that got everybody so excited?
Well, we are like everybody, right? We are continuously innovating, listening to the voice of our customer, who is the person with diabetes, the healthcare provider. And one of the things we continuously heard was people want a sensor that lasts even longer. I mean, we were lasting 90 days in the U.S. It was already 180 days outside the U.S. But for both, this is the next iteration for both. So this is we call it E3 because it's really our third sensor iteration. So some chemistry changed, as you can imagine. Some of the other little minor things also changed. But the major change was in that sensing surface, allowing it to have a chemistry change that enables it to last really reliably for the 6-month time period. Whenever we put something in the body reacts. And the way the body reacts to our sensor and the other sensors is it kind of oxidizes it, it surrounds it, it does a lot of other things to it. This chemistry change enables that reaction to be less significant over time, so that the sensing capability remains really excellent for a much longer period of time. Therefore, we can get the 6-month indication.
Talk to me a little bit about the clinical trials that I'm sure were done for this. When you're talking about 6 months, the questions my listeners had mostly about this was like, well, what could go wrong, right? What if I want to get this taken out? Or what if it irritates me? Tell me a little bit about the people who've already done this.
So there's our clinical trial, the PROMISE trial, that involved 181 individuals wearing actually more than one sensor for the most part. And then there's our vast, really commercial experience, both outside the U.S. as well as the inside the U.S., where thousands of patients have used the sensors. Worst case scenario, you decide you don't want to have a CGM at all. You can get it removed, or you could actually leave it in place till the time duration is up and get it removed then. There's really no compelling indication that you have to get it removed right away if you don't want it or if it stops working. It actually is kind of okay as a permanent implant, although that is not what we're asking people to do. We are asking them, as well as the FDA, asking them to get it removed when the time comes. So that would be worst case scenario. For the most part, once it's placed in the skin is healed. Again, the mild adhesive on the skin, really people enjoy it, want it, need it. But our system, rather than have no sensor in at all, if you decide for a period of time you don't want to wear the transmitter, maybe you're getting married, maybe you're going to Hawaii and you're willing to go without your CGM, which of course, for me and my patients, that would be a big no-no. Then you can just take the transmitter off, charge it, then put it in a drawer and put it back on when you come back home. So it gives you that option if you don't want to wear the transmitter to take it off for a period of time, or to take it off, an hour a day or 2 hours a day, whatever you'd like to do. There's a lot more flexibility because you're not losing the sensor at that point.
Yeah, talk to me about that, because I'm imagining, and I've shared this on the show before, my son is very interested in this, especially because of sports and wrestling in particular. He thought it would be so great to be able to take the transmitter on and off. While you have it off, you've already mentioned the sensor will still alert you, it'll vibrate.
No. As soon as that transmitter's off, you do not get any sensor readings at all. So
my mistake.
Yeah.
My mistake. I thought for some reason it vibrated under the skin even without it.
No, it's not. The sensor's not vibrating in your body. It's the transmitter on top of your skin that's vibrating.
Got it. Okay. Talk to us a little bit about accuracy, what you found commercially, as you mentioned, and in the clinical trials. I think my listeners are pretty familiar with MARD, but can you speak to that?
Absolutely. I have been in the field of diabetes since 1978, so I'm old and I'm really proud of it. And I've seen so much. Well, I started with animal insulin and urine testing. And obviously, what I've seen in my own career lifetime is awe-inspiring. Unfortunately, it hasn't gotten us all where we want to be, which is done with this disease altogether. But it has made, obviously, management so much more important, easier, better, difficult, whatever you want to say. But we do now have a lot of tools and technology that can improve people's management. One of them is CGM. And those early CGMs, which I was involved with when I was in academic medicine as an investigator, were wonderful. You couldn't rely on them to make a dose adjustment for sure, but you could get patterns and trends and see what was kind of happening overnight. And it was really an amazing advancement. Then as the accuracy continued to get better for these devices, we were able to look at a point in time and say, that's what my glucose value is. I can dose off that glucose value, which of course is what you're able to do with our sensor. And then you got more and more accuracy. And now that's what, really your value is. So our accuracy is measured by MARD during our PROMISE trial. And one of the issues we have to face is the longer the duration the sensor lasts, the longer our clinical trials have to last. So if you've got a sensor that lasts 7 days, your trial's 7 days. If it lasts 14 days, your trial's 14 days. If it lasts 180 days, your trial's 180 days. And one day we'll get up to 365. So we'll have these really long trials that will be arduous for the patient and our clinical investigators, and a long time to get the results. But so for this 6-month trial, people came in 10 times, about 10 hours each time. We drove them high and low so that we could get across the sensor life as well as across all the glucose values from 40 to 400 to see the accuracy of our Eversense E3 system. And the MARD turned out overall to be 8.5, which is excellent. We're really happy with that MARD. It's among best in class for CGMs that are available. And as always, the MARD is least on the first day. Of course, we only have one first day every 6 months, whereas the other sensors, it's every week or every 10 days or every 14 days. And then it really settles down. And all the way till the end of sensor life, 180 days, the accuracy was at that point still below 8.
Below 8?
Below 8.
Wow.
But, you have to put all the 7 days first. So we did first day, 7 day, 14 day, 21 day, 30 day, 60 day, 90 day, 120, 150, and 180 day evaluation. So when you put all those together, it turns out to be a MARD of 8.5. And then, of course, it's in the hypo range. We had an excellent MARD, also a little bit less than 8. In the hyper, we had an excellent MARD, less than 8. So it really is a pretty excellent system.
Is it simplistic to assume that it gets better as it goes? Or does it get better for a certain point and then it gets a little higher?
Well, actually, we could have assumed that, but it turns out it's highest at the beginning and then pretty much stayed around the low 8s, high 7s the rest of the time period.
I'll confirm this, but I don't believe any other CGM in the U.S. has a MARD that is under 8. I don't know that you can talk about it like that. As you said, it's 8.5 for the whole life of the sensor. But that's really interesting.
Well, there are, depending on the conditions and other things, there are some MARDs that are under 8 as well. And does MARD need to be 5? Does MARD need to be 6? We're probably pretty close to good enough or excellent enough in that 8 range. When we started MARDs, the first MARD was, I think, 25.
Yeah. Yeah. It's come a long way.
Yeah.
Talk to us about calibration. The system does need to be calibrated, but the E3 less than before?
Absolutely. So as you can imagine, a sensor lasting 180 days, and when we get to the year-long sensor, we'll likely not ever be able to get away from any kind of calibration. Now, we're hoping with a 365-hour year-long sensor, which will be a real marked change to some of the platform configurations, that we might be able to only have to calibrate once a week. But right now we're at a calibration of, for the first 21 days, it's twice a day. So the first calibration is really easy. You wake up in the morning, you take the transmitter off. It does need to be charged. It takes about 10 to 15 minutes to charge. You take your shower, you clean your skin, you put the transmitter back on, and you do your calibration. And then 12 hours later, you need another calibration for the first 21 days. And then after that, it's mainly one calibration a day.
I'm pausing because I'm intrigued. We'll have to come back later to that 365
Okay.
when we talk about what's next. Is the goal ultimately no calibration, or you've already kind of hinted that as it gets longer and longer, where you don't anticipate, with a year-long sensor, you anticipate continuing to have some kind, but once a month is the goal?
Yeah, well, once a week.
I'm sorry, once a week.
We're not exactly sure, but it's hard to imagine that we would have something that long that would not require some calibration.
Let's talk a little bit about one of the biggest questions that my listeners sent in, which was, when will this work with my pump? Do you have any plan? I mean, I'm assuming you have plans in place, but I'll let you jump in. You already started to answer it.
Yeah, well, that's obviously our goal as well. And so we're working towards that. I can't really give a time frame because it's not just dependent on us. And as you can imagine, some of the companies coming out are just trying to get their first product out, that first iteration. So there'll be a bit of a lag, but we're doing everything we can to facilitate it.
I do have to be nosy. I understand if you can't answer this. Any of the existing pump companies in the U.S. on the table with you?
Well, we hope every pump company is going to be on the table with us when the time comes.
And what would have to happen? Is there another designation? Is it ICGM that you all need to get?
It's pretty much ICGM. And then, of course, even once you get that, you've got to do some coordination with the pump companies, open the API. How do they talk to each other? It is a bit away, but we're working on it. Trust me.
My husband was joking last night when I was telling him we were going to speak, and he was like, gosh, then they need to implant the pump. He's like, put it all under the skin. I was like, you know what, Doug, you're getting ahead of yourself. Like, let's do one thing.
It is interesting. When you talk to cardiologists, everything they have is implanted. When you talk to endocrinologists, they're not quite as familiar with the concept of implanting things. And the reason the implant makes so much sense is you can't knock it off. It's obviously easy to put in and to retrieve. And it takes some of the burden. You may have to calibrate, but you don't have to change sensors every week or every other week. And you don't have to order things anymore. So there's a trade-off on our goal, which is to make life easier, more simple for people with diabetes. So that implant does in and of itself make things in a different framework where I just don't have to, I travel, I don't have to take anything but my little adhesive patches versus somebody otherwise has to take half their suitcase full of sensors.
Yeah. You mentioned endocrinologists and the implants. How is the physician training going? And pardon my ignorance, is it an endocrinologist that you train to do this? Is it another kind of doctor who puts it in?
Well, the answer is yes to all of that. So endocrinologists have come forth and been interested in learning how to do it. We're not the only implantable drug that, system that they have. They've got the implantable birth control. So some that are very, very interested, love doing the procedure, kind of gets them back to why they wanted to be physicians. And then others, of course, who don't feel they want to really do it. So they refer their patients to somebody who is doing it. So we have mainly endocrinologists. We've got dermatologists, primary care, you name it, and they are there, as well as not just physicians and osteopathic doctors, but also nurse practitioners and physicians' assistants do it as well.
I remember when we first started talking about this a few years ago, there were very few doctors who did it. I remember talking to our endo here, and he was like, I don't know anybody in Charlotte. I'm imagining that has changed. Do you have any numbers or how people would find out if it's done in their area?
Well, absolutely. We can help them find out if it's done in their area, if their own physician isn't doing it. But we certainly have picked up more and more physicians when a patient comes to the doctor and says, hey, do you know about this? I saw it. I'm really captivated by some of its qualities and differentiators. And the doc says, I don't know much. Let me contact. Then they contact us. We talk about, what it would be like to become a proceduralist. And many of them say yes. So we have been able to increase the number of people learning how to do the procedure, particularly in some of the large groups and the large practices. A lot of them just really enjoy that aspect of medicine that they hadn't done maybe for a while. And certainly the new endocrinologists coming out, they're much more technology based than people my generation. Of course, most of the people my generation are retired, which I do not intend to do. They want to have a procedure. They want to be able to break up the day. And many of them in their practices, do it like Wednesday afternoons or Friday mornings to accommodate their patients. And of course, they get reimbursed for it. It's part of their time, part of their, they need to be trained. It's a way to be a little closer to your patients in some way. A couple of the clinicians have told me, it's enhanced my relationship with some of my patients when, we have that opportunity for me to really impact in this significant way.
Yeah, that makes sense. You mentioned supplies. I was also thinking about cost when you said that because, right, anything with a surgical procedure, even though it's very minor, is going to have a cost associated with it. But I would assume that's balanced out by, as you said, you're not ordering supplies, you're not getting new stuff every couple of weeks. Can you talk a little bit about the insurance side of this? Is this well covered?
It is well covered. We'd like it to be universally covered. We're working towards that as well. As you can imagine, we have a whole group of people, some inside Senseonics, but mainly with our partner, Ascensia Diabetes Care, who is our partner in the sales and marketing of the Eversense CGM systems. And now, of course, they're very excited about having Eversense E3. So they're working hard with the payers as well. Medicare pays for it. I think we have over 200 million covered lives, and we're hoping to be able to continue to have every insurance company cover this. Now, if your insurance company doesn't cover it, there's appeals that can occur. For the most part, those appeals work because the insurance company realizes the benefit of patients having CGM. And we're, really differentiated. So who's the patient who wants to use an implanted CGM? Somebody who, just either travels a lot, doesn't want to worry about reordering, doesn't want to put something in themselves for whatever reason, dexterity, cognitive, just don't like taking out all those needles and looking at them and putting things in themselves. And then people really, really enjoy that long-term concept as well as the vibratory alerts. We've got people who work on the tarmac at the airport and they can't hear anything. So the only way they can actually do this is with the vibratory alerts.
Do you really have somebody who works at an airport like that?
We do.
That's just fabulous.
And these are some of the people who've come forth and, they're our ambassadors. Somebody who works in an elevator shaft and can't have anything big on their body. And this enables them to be down there and still feel the vibratory alerts.
I have a bunch of questions that are more forward looking, but before we kind of move on to that, I'd be curious what you have learned. I mean, the system's been around in a shorter wear form since 2016 in Europe. And I'm curious, what has changed or what have you learned from the people who have used it?
Well, what's been really interesting is once somebody gets their second sensor, they're hooked for life. There are some who use it and then, it wasn't right for them. The same with other CGMs, the same with pumps, the same with any kind of technology. But once somebody said, I like my first one, let me get a second one, then they're pretty much hooked for life. And what do they want? They want longer duration with the same level of accuracy. People really appreciate the accuracy of our system. As a result, they continue to use it. We've got patients on their 10th, 15th, I don't even know how many sensors some of them have had. Were on early and have never left.
Does it always go in the same place? Is it always on the arm and then they just kind of switch back and forth to either arm?
They do. And I'm probably the only one who can say this since I'm a physician. There are, of course, as always, off-label use of things.
Okay, we will leave that there, but very interesting. This might be a very dumb question. Can you go through airport sensors with this? The different devices, metal detectors, all that kind of stuff?
You can. You can even have a MRI. The other sensors need to be removed for an MRI, but you must remove the transmitter.
Got it. That's interesting. An MRI and x-rays and all that?
Yep, without the transmitter on.
You've already mentioned that the goal here is longer wear, one whole year. That's something that you all are working toward. I'm curious too, again, not to bring this personal or anything, my son is not yet 18 and he's been talking about this for a while. Are you looking into pediatrics?
We are looking into pediatrics. So we're hoping to have our 365-day sensor in clinical trial in 2022. It's our hope. We're working towards it. and that will have a pediatric component.
You've already alluded to the fact that you've been in diabetes for a while. You worked directly with patients. I'm curious, could you give us some perspective on this? I mean, there are some people that look at a device like Eversense and say, yes, give me, I want that. Or, for my child, for myself, this is terrific. There are others who are squeamish about it, can't possibly think about it, just aren't interested. I'm curious, when you're thinking about your patients, how do you talk to them about things like this? Do you see patients anymore?
I do see patients. I couldn't imagine not seeing patients at some point. And I will admit I've been very unusual in that I've been out of my academic practice since 2009, and I'm still seeing my same patients and picking up some new ones here and there. Everybody has what they think is going to work for them. They try things. Maybe it does work. Maybe it doesn't work. But when I think what kind of captivates somebody about Eversense is that it is long-term. No longer does the patient have to worry about reordering and where they're going to be on Saturday because they've got to change their sensor. And what happens if the sensor comes out early? Where's all those kinds of issues. So with a fully implantable sensor, it's there and it's in there. Lots of people like that as kind of really reducing some of the burden of diabetes for them. Once they hear about that and they hear about, if I want to, I can take off the transmitter without sacrificing. I like the idea. I don't have to have my phone with me all the time. I mean, just all these advantages kind of captivate many, many people. And as a result, they want that opportunity. And once they have it and they see those advantages, they stick with it for the most part. It has to be the right person. We are by no means saying that 90% of people who are on intensive insulin management should be using Eversense. Sure. But probably 10, 15, 20% should be. And when you look at really kind of what the recommendations are now as a healthcare provider for me to manage my patients on intensive insulin, it's hard to imagine doing it without a CGM. That means, there's 1.6 million type 1s. They all likely need a CGM. 3 million type 2s likely need a CGM. With all that number of patients, there need to be choices. There need to be differentiators, not just the same over and over again, whether it's 7 days or 10 days or 14 days. And that's really where we're kind of captivating the healthcare provider as well as captivating the patient.
I'd love for you to come back on, perhaps with maybe half the Eversense hat on. And what I'm getting at is to talk to somebody like yourself who has been in this world for so long, who has seen a lot of changes, who has adapted with and helped their patients take advantage of all of the changes that have come through. I feel like it's an opportunity to really kind of dig into more about diabetes. So I hope you don't mind if I call you again in the future.
I'd love to. I'll probably have a little bit of a bonnet on for Eversense.
We can make that. That's fine. Yeah. We can go with that. But before I let you go here, let me ask you about it. I don't know if you've seen new patients anymore, but when you talk to your patients, I assume I'm just picturing, gosh, I'm not trying to butter you up, I promise, but lucky patients. Right? They've got an endo who's passionate, who really cares about this, who's really, we're lucky to we have one as well like that. When you're talking to your patients these days, so much technology has changed in just the last 5 years and so much more cool stuff is coming. I assume you don't just focus on that tech, right? You're not just, hey, here's a CGM, go home. Can you give us kind of a peek into what you think makes a really good start or a really good continuation, or I guess I should say a really good plan for people living with type 1 right now?
Yeah, well, I mean, probably the most important thing is to find support. Nobody can do this alone, ever. I don't care how old you are. I don't care how independent you think you are. And whether that support is with your healthcare team, with your family members, I mean, it's all the better when it's multifaceted. Mm-hmm. I'm very involved with my patients. They all have my home phone number, call me whenever they want, text me all day long, mainly because it's such a burden that we transfer over to them. We teach them, we do this diabetes education, stay in this lane, don't go too high, don't go too low, don't eat that, don't do this. And it's hard and they really need support. So, camps, groups, your podcast, I mean, what a difference all this makes. And if I really had to say, what's the biggest difference I've seen over my career, it's that we've gotten diabetes into the open. People aren't hiding it anymore. And as a result, it's part of normal life. And it's trials and tribulations, the time it takes. isn't as difficult when people can see the benefit and feel that support in their community, their parents, their friends, their spouse, their coworkers. And I think for the most part, people are fascinated by the technology when you show it to them, when my patients show it to them, very interested in helping out however they can. And that's, to me, the biggest change. When I first started my career, we spent so much time trying to tell people not to hide diabetes. Yeah. One of my patients told me the other day, she just got a new job. She brought her coworkers together, showed them her sensor, her meter, her glucagon, and, kind of felt it was a badge of honor that they offered to learn about it, to help her if need be. And she felt, kind of automatically brought into a community of people who care. And I think the vast, vast, vast majority of people do care. And then, of course, the technology is just, the advances have been monumental since I began my career. Patients being involved in their care, doing what needs to be done, looking towards the future, understanding their own lab tests, coming with questions. I mean, that's where the fun is. I was in clinic yesterday. I saw a relatively new patient. He's about 9, and the father is what he has learned. These two parents have learned in a short period of time. Rivals what my fellows can learn.
I said I was going to ask you this one question and let you go, but I have to follow up with, why are you still working? You said, I'm never going to retire. You already said that. You're like, that's it. Why are you so passionate about this?
Well, first of all, I'm in my early 70s, which is the new 40s, I think. I feel great. And I have spent so much of my career getting to where I am and the understanding I personally have that what would I do all day? Why wouldn't I want to continue to do whatever I can? And that's just how I am, I guess.
I love
Most of my friends have retired and they're happy and they're doing what they need to be doing. I mean, the beauty of my end of the age spectrum is that you can do what you want. There's no, I have to go to school or I should get married and I got to get a job. I mean, by this time, you get to do what you want finally.
Well, boy, are we lucky. This is what you want to do. Gosh, thank you so much for joining me. I'd love to have you back. You can bring your bonnet and we'll work it out.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you so much.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
More information about Eversense E3 at diabetes-connections.com. Wherever you are listening, there should be extensive show notes. If not, you can always go back to diabetes-connections.com and check out the episode homepage. I reached out to Daryl Green, the gentleman that I spoke to a couple of years ago, to get his thoughts on what he thinks of the system now. So I'm going to report back and let you know what he thinks, if he's still using it. And if you are using Eversense, I'd love to hear from you as well. I will also link up a couple of reviews that were in the community a couple of years ago for an earlier version. But if you are in Europe, perhaps you've been using the 180-day for a while, or you're newer, you want to use the E3 in the US as it rolls out, let me know. I'd love to follow up because there's so much curiosity about this system. And for so many people, it comes down to the actual procedure, right? Once it's in, people seem to love it. The questions people have are about, how does the procedure go? Is it easy to find a doctor? Is it easy to get it removed? So I'd love to hear from you if you have experience in that way. All right, coming up, I want to give you a sneak peek into what we're talking about next week, and that is all about Pixar's Turning Red. And boy, I'm so excited about the show I have for you. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dexcom. And when we first started with Dexcom, and that was in December of 2013, a long time ago now, share and follow apps were not an option. They hadn't released that technology yet. I know that using share and follow makes a big difference. I think it's really important, though, to talk to the person you're following or sharing with and get comfortable with how you want to use the system. Even if you're following your young child. I mean, Benny was 9 when we started with that. These are great conversations to have, and they change over time. What number are you going to text your kid at? How long are you going to wait to call your spouse? That sort of thing. And that way, the whole system gives everybody real peace of mind. I have loved helping Benny with any blood glucose issues, using the data from the whole day and night and not just one moment. Internet connectivity is required to access separate Dexcom Follow app. To learn more, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. Next week's episode is one I cannot wait to share with you. It is all about Pixar's Turning Red. If you're not familiar, the plot of this movie has nothing to do with diabetes. It's all about adolescence. There's a girl, she turns into a giant panda, red panda, when she gets excited. And then she has to be calm to turn back into herself. I don't know any more than that because I haven't seen the movie yet. But I do know, as you've seen, if you've seen the trailers, that there are 2 what they call background characters with diabetes technology. And as soon as we saw that trailer, there were 2 of them that were released, actually. The diabetes community went bananas. And I used some of my contacts to reach out to Pixar. So I have an interview with the person at Pixar who is responsible for this. I've seen a lot of interesting rumors online. It is not John Lasseter. He is no longer with Pixar. He is the former CEO there, and he has a child with type 1 who's probably an adult now. He was responsible for developing Elsa in Frozen from a bad guy. She was supposed to be a real villain in that movie to a much more sympathetic character with powers she could control because Lasseter saw a parallel to diabetes in that character. His son has diabetes. It's something that he didn't choose, right? Didn't want, but it's a part of him. And it doesn't make him bad. And he saw that parallel in Elsa and it helped guide the character. And I'll link that up. He's talked about that publicly before if you're not familiar with that story. But it wasn't him. And it wasn't a person on set or a voice actor who had a child with type 1. I can't tell you more because it is embargoed until a little bit closer to the movie's release. But I am going to put the episode out early. So here's how the schedule is going to go. We're going to have In the News. That will be Wednesday, live on social media. You can watch it on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Instagram. And that becomes an audio-only episode that will be released on Friday. And then on Sunday, March 6th, I will be releasing the following week's long format interview episode in advance of the March 11th release of Turning Red. If you follow or subscribe to the show, different podcast apps use different terminology, you will get it, no problem. It'll automatically come to you. If you follow me on social media, you'll see it. If you subscribe to the newsletter, and if you don't, that's the best way really to keep in touch with me off of social media. You can subscribe just by going to diabetes-connections.com and scrolling all the way down, or the pop-up will come up. But the newsletter will go out to remind you. So I'm really excited about that. I'm thrilled to have had this interview and to get more insight. And I hope we've made a new friend for the show. I know she listens. I don't know if I should even say that, but I hope she sticks around. All right, that'll do it. Thanks as always to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. And thank you so much for listening. A lot coming up. I will see you back here soon. Until then, be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.